Hey guys, my name's Matthew O and I'm an environment artist at Ubisoft Massive. Recently I've been doing a lot of cars in my personal work, and in order to texture them I've been using Ddo. The reason I've been using Ddo is because I find Ddo is really quick to get nice texture results, and when I'm working on my cars I want it to not take too long so I don't really get bored with them. So I try and keep all of my projects to about a month at the most. So I thought it'd be cool in this tutorial to show a Myotech monster, and I'll be looking at the Spitfire and trying to replicate that paint job along with some of the decal work on the monster, just because I thought it'd be a pretty cool combination. So I'm going to show you how I did that now, so let's do this. Okay, so the first thing I really wanted to show, just before we kind of get into the real kind of nitty gritty of it, is some kind of a very basic part of the way I'm working on my vehicles. So as you can see when you look at stuff like this, the modeling isn't complex at all. Like I've taken this basic shape and I've just kind of slammed it into this curve. Like, it looks a bit terrible. I don't know why it's lagging like that, but whatever. So yeah, you can see it's not well modeled. I've not modeled it in, I've not unified it or anything like that. The reason why I'm doing this is because I can rely on the round edge shader in Modo. So this is a really good example of where I'm using it. So what you'll see is that as I work with Ddo, I'm actually skipping out on normal maps, and normal maps are obviously pretty useful nowadays. So I just wanted to show you this because this is kind of the reason why I'm skipping out normal maps, because it gives errors basically when you can combine normal maps with the round edge shader at the same time. And as you can see, I'm kind of using Ddo for everything. So like all the metal work on the radiators and the engine and all the general kind of like scuffed up painted metal and yeah, rusted old stuff. All of this is just all Ddo tiling over, even like tiling rubber on the tires and everything. So that's kind of like why I'm going to show you Ddo, but this is the main reason why I'm not using normal maps and why my modeling looks like, yeah, not good in a lot of places. Because if you're from outside of Modo, then obviously this isn't going to be common knowledge to a lot of people, although you can use it in things like Keyshot and stuff like that nowadays. So if you look at this shape here, when I render the car, this is this shape here. You have these super hard edges. Let me get a slightly better angle. You have these super hard edges all around here where it's modeled, and obviously I've not beveled it at all because it took like a split second to model this piece and not have to put the time into control loops and smoothing and stuff like that. But obviously this looks terrible. I wouldn't want to show this to anyone right now. So then what I can do is, if I actually take the material, and I'll just bring the properties window over here so you can see it, and I go to round edge width and I set this to 0.5 centimeter, then that's where the magic of the round edge shader comes in. So now we get this super nice transition coming into the actual shape from the cylinder. We have a really, really nice rounded edge. You could be clever and say, okay, now I want to take all concave shading based on an occlusion map and apply a bump map or a normal bump map for weld marks, so you could make it look like it's welded, and then the round edge shader would round it out, and then you'd have welded marks based on a map over the top, and then obviously convex edges like this wouldn't get it. But I don't kind of really push it that far because I don't need to, because ultimately this detail is going to be like, yeah, this big at the most, so there's just no real need. But you can see that the entire engine, like, there's lots of detail and it's just built in this same kind of fashion. So if you look here, it's all just like cylinders pushed into cylinders and blah blah blah. It's not amazingly well modeled. It's just quick and sloppy, which does exactly what I need for just rendering, and then I use Ddo to get my nice texture work going, and then yeah, I get this super cool result. So I'm obviously about to show you the Ddo section of it, because this is a Ddo tutorial, and I won't be kind of going into detail on how I'm doing stuff in Modo, but I did want to explain why I'm not using normal maps, and yeah, the benefit to using Modo, and why I'm using the round edge shader and blah blah blah, just as a brief explanation towards my workflow. So now that I've shown you the round edge shader, we should move on to actually setting up the base of the car ready for some camo. So the first thing I want to do is obviously the bodywork of the car. I kind of want the material in my render to look roughly how it should, just using constants in the base shader, before I take the materials, bring them back in, apply them on top, just because it takes a lot less effort if it's already feeling like roughly the right roughness values and stuff like that. So if we take this shot again, then I think this material is actually looking pretty awesome already, because it just needs to be just a super basic, yeah, nice flat material with some decent roughness, not too shiny or anything like that. You can see the round edge shader kicking in on a lot of these edges, and yeah, so this is basically going to be my base, and I'm going to go and create a camo material to sit on top of this, and then yeah, then we should start to get the results we want. So all I should do is take this, and obviously if it's going to be camo, then we should make it like hot pink, because what is more military than a hot pink car? Yes, perfect. So obviously we're going to replace the hot pink in a minute, but yeah, beautiful. I mean, maybe we should call it done here? I don't know. What do you guys think? It feels alright. Anyway, yeah, so this is how I'm working. Basically, you're just going to take an area, apply a material to it, make sure the hot pink is hot pink. I've made it hot pink so I can see it's not affecting any of the rest of the car. Make sure it's rendering well, blah, blah, blah. It's reacting to lights and the IBL in the scene and everything. And then I say, okay, now I want to take this, I want to go over to dedo, generate material, save it all out, and then I'll come back here in a second and start applying it. So, okay, we should go over and create a camo material. And I would, thank you very much, dedo, thank you. Okay, so you can probably tell I've had a lot of caffeine this morning. So now I have my blank scene. I have a cylinder, sort of semi-lit, from my last thing I worked on. So what I want to do is show basically why I'm using dedo. So I am not a good texture artist. I can obviously go into Photoshop, I can take materials, slap them together, stuff like that, and get good like basic stuff. But yeah, I'm not one to spend a large amount of time being a genius and procedurally generating crazy materials. So what I love is that I can sit and design my car, model it all up, get all the detail into it, and then when I'm ready to present it nicely, I can come into dedo and I have this huge library of sick materials. So if I wanted my car to be made of painted concrete, or if I want it to be lacquered wood, or if I wanted it to be synthetic cloth or military plastic, whatever that is, then yeah, I have all this like crazy stuff. I could be bone, alien skin, could do an alien skin car. I mean, that looks sick, look at that. Okay, so for me, what I want to do is I would like to go to military metal, and that sounds like a music genre. And what I want to do is take one of these camouflage materials and use one of these as the base to my Spitfire camouflage. So as you can see here, although they have these kind of pre-built materials, they have plenty of kind of procedural things or texture work lying on top based on procedural masks that are generated from the curvature or the normal or the AO of the mesh and all its bakes that have been plugged in. So as you can see, you have all this edge damage and stuff like that, and then on here it might be slightly different because it might be chipped because it's looking at edges and then tiling a mask through it. And this is one of the things I really like about dedo. So you're also not limited to the textures that are coming in. As you can see, this one is all different kinds of greens, and then this one down here is the exact same camouflage, except it's using whites and greys. So you could easily take this crazy camouflage that makes no sense and make it greys, whites, blacks, make it digital camouflage, and yeah, off you go. So I'm going to take this jungle tan karma as my base because I think it looks badass. And I'm going to watch these bars work a lot faster than I would. And I'm just going to hit this little refresh button down here because that'll refresh 3D. You don't need to do it all the time, it's just probably because it was already sitting open from before. So right now when I look at this, obviously it was called jungle camo, so it looks like jungle camo with a little man dancing with some sort of plate on his head and some deer antlers built in. And then the kind of faded look and the kind of light dirt on it makes it look like fabric to me. So the first thing I want to do is take the dirt and I'm going to turn it, I'm going to make it super dark. Okay, this probably won't make much sense at the moment, but I think it will when I've kind of changed all my colors. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to turn off discoloration. I can just pronounce that in a really weird way. So I'm getting kind of more of a gnarly kind of camo look now. The other thing I'm going to do quickly before I forget is I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to delete the normal map. That's because the rounded edge shader in Modo doesn't work well with normal maps because they're trying so hard to actually do what a normal map does that they're kind of conflicting with the rounded edge shader. So what I tend to do instead is use the bump maps. So obviously you can work on the bump maps in Dido as well, so I don't really have a problem with working like that. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to turn off this surface rust because the mask is almost completely black as no bake information has been brought in to generate a mask. So I'll just turn that off as it's not actually needed. There was a tiny bit of rust that just disappeared, but I mean, yeah, it's not something I need. The next thing I'm going to do is I'll turn off the dirt for a second just because it's a little bit distracting. I am going to adjust the amount of rust that you can see through the paint. So if you look over here, there's actually a mask being generated, and what it's doing is it's blending multiple textures together to generate this rust. So if I change the scale on 1, let's change this one to 0 and break up some of that tiling. Maybe -2. No, this one doesn't make too much difference anyway. But yeah, I don't think this will matter too much because it's going to become more subtle than this. So the main thing I want to do is bring a lot more white into this material, because where there's light color there's camo paint, and where there's dark color there's rust. So maybe reduce the contrast slightly. No, I'll pump it up actually. Yeah, and I think that'll give me the result I want. So then this will basically mean I have a lot more camo and a lot less rust, because I want it to look like it's not been looked after too well over a couple of years, but not that it's been sat in a junkyard for a really long time, or a scrap yard as we call them in Britain. So now you can obviously see that our little dancing man with a plate on his head is way more clear. So unfortunately for the dancing man and the antlers, there's so much camo going on right now that it looks more like the small scale camo you would have on a jacket or a pair of pants. So what I want to do is get rid of the smaller scale stuff so it looks more like the larger scale camo that you would have on a big vehicle, or like I'm seeing in the reference on the Spitfire. So I can go into the camo folder, I'm just going to turn off beige and turn off dark green. So now we get a bit more like what I'm thinking. So the first thing I'm going to do is go down to my brown note, and I'm going to change this to more of a aquamarine dark green color, and then we'll try and keep the saturation a bit high just because it'll look super cool in the render. let me just try and zoom in a little bit in Photoshop, so we're not just looking at a huge grey screen with a tiny square in the middle. And yeah, I want a bit more blue in that. Yeah, that looks pretty sick. Lovely. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, nice. Okay, so now I'm going to take the light green and I'm going to go for more of a slightly diarrhea brown. That being a technical term for the colour I'm about to use. And what I want is not, I'm just pointing at the screen, I'm actually putting my finger on the screen right now, as if you can see it. So imagine this little eye, this dropper is my finger. So what I want is not too much contrast between the light brown and the green, because I want the decals at the end to pop a bit more. So I don't want loads of contrast in the camouflage, because also that will just kind of counteract the point of camouflage. You kind of want everything to start to blend together as opposed to super conflicting colors and contrast levels, so you actually just see something move more often than not. And then now that I have a kind of a base that I actually think could work quite well, I will turn my dirt back on. Yeah, I think that'll look cool. Maybe make it slightly darker. And then I am also going to go into my bump map. As you can see right now, it's basically completely flat grey. I'm going to take my dirt and I'm going to increase it slightly. So it's like shit sitting on top of the material. And then I'm going to, not actual poop, and then I'm going to take the rust and I'm going to make that a bit darker. Not too dark, because I don't want like loads of light information being created by this material, and it just generally creates a little bit of yeah, surface detail across the material. And then I will save that because I think this looks effing glorious, and as you can see, it's only taken a couple of minutes. And I'm going to hit my export button. It's already set up to the right location. I'm going to change this to camo, and then I'm going to do export all materials, and then we are going to go and see what it looks like in Modo. Okay, so the next step is obviously to take this super hot sexy pink car and to apply the camo we just generated to the pink. So the whole car is kind of like a combination, or the bodywork is a combination of just subdivision modeling, and yeah, as you can see, it's just subdivided using round edge shader for hard edges like this. And then I've done an Atlas UV on it, and then I've set my Atlas UV to 512 pixels per meter aspect ratio, so that we're working at the same aspect ratio as what I was thinking, and then I can scale up and down based on what I think looks good. And because we worked at 1024 per meter in the document, that means it'll work nicely. So the first thing I'm going to do is get up a render of the side of the car. I'll make it a bit smaller so it's a bit quicker, and we just want to get to the side of the vehicle like this and get a nice glancing angle. And obviously right now the specular is way high on the vehicle, so even though it's not very glossy, you're getting like large bright highlights. So the first thing I want to do is apply the specular, then I want to apply my bump map, just make sure everything feels like it's kind of the material feels right, and then I want to apply my color after that. So because obviously the color is camo, so it's going to be super distracting. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply my specular. So obviously this looks way more how you would expect the material of a tank or something like that to act. And then you have rust and dirt coming down it. That's obviously got a lot less specular than the rest of the vehicle, so it's much rougher. Okay, so yeah, that looks pretty cool. And then the next thing I'll do is bring in my bump. So we'll apply that. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. So obviously that might feel quite noisy and a bit too much up close, but I think that'll read really well at a distance. because if we get all this kind of like macro detail here, then it will just give quite a kind of high level of fidelity to the vehicle as a whole when you have a render of the whole car at once. And it's small enough that it will kind of disappear into the texture work. It won't kind of destroy your kind of level of noise ratio across the vehicle. So it won't make it like a complete mess. So I think that will feel that. I mean, that looks really cool like that already. And then I'll apply my diffuse. So this actually may be not contrasty enough. Actually, no, that feels really cool. So I think the problem is that dirt is really, really strong. The rust I'm not noticing so much. But yeah, I think it looks pretty good right off the bat, to be honest. I mean, we could make changes, which you guys know how to do, as you've seen me making changes just now. Because all I would be making changes to is color or specular, things like that, and bump values. But this feels pretty good. So what I'll do is, if I just zoom out a little bit, I think it might be slightly too glossy. So I think it might have slightly too much speck in the texture. And then I think I need to actually turn down the dirt a little bit because it's just a bit strong. Because in a minute what I'll do is I'll turn on some decals that I've kind of built to look like the Spitfire's decals, and what I want is for them to get the center of attention and not for all this kind of crazy noise to take away from that. So I'll just turn off the render quickly, and I'm just going to go over to, not that, I'm going to go over to Photoshop, and I'm just going to go to dirt and turn the opacity down on the dirt. Is it doing it? Yeah, okay, so I want that probably at like, I don't want it to go away, so I probably want it around 75%. That's enough. And yeah, my specular on the actual camo felt a little bit too high. I have been turning it up a little bit. It's not exactly what you would get from thingy, so that's my mistake. So I'll go into paint and I'll just bring these down so they're not too crazy. Yeah, something like that. I'll have a slight difference. Save that. And I have a feeling this is probably going to be enough, and that's all the iteration I need to do. Pop back over to Modo, reload my images. I think they're reloaded. Yeah, and then let's have a look again. Yeah, I think it looks awesome. I mean, it obviously still a little bit noisy. I can keep adjusting this before I'm finished, but I think it looks really nice, and it feels quite true to the Spitfire. I mean, I'm not going exactly the same because I want you to see this kind of cool camo patterns. I could obviously move the UVs around because it's a tiling texture to adjust where I want the camo patterns and stuff like that. But I mean, yeah, the actual texture work looks good. And then the only other thing I want to do is I will turn on my other mesh object, which is just some floating geometry that is just a pilot's name and umming and ahhing a lot. And then this is the REF circle on the side of the vehicle. So now if I take a look, it just sits over the top. It's not got shadow casting turned off or anything like that. Then obviously these kind of want to pull attention a bit more. So you don't want to have too much contrast in the camouflage because you want the contrast from the white to kind of draw the eye more than the material. Yeah, I think that looks cool. I think the dirt can maybe still come down a little bit, but I can mess with that. You can see the decals are super basic. They're just textures with an alpha that I've built in Photoshop and then UV to a plane and floated the plane. So there's nothing complex going on there. All of the textures on the car, like this, let's make it a little bit bigger. All the textures on the car, like this tire, is just dedo, or the same with all the kind of like the metals, dirty rusty materials, the camo, everything. It's all just tiling dedo materials that I've set up, brought in, applied, made sure I'm happy with it, moved on. So the texturing work I did on the original low-tech monster probably took about an hour, and then I've taken I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes to apply this camo. So the only other thing I'm going to do is that this framework that OTech Industries is sitting on right now is completely flat grey with just the round edge shader turned on, and that's all it's doing. So I'm going to create one more really boring material for that one that's just going to be paint with some chipped away bits on it, just to show my process again really quickly. So if you want to, you can just skip that part of the video because you've seen me do it with the camo, and a lot of you probably understand this stuff super easily because it's probably really surprising how obvious the way I'm building this car is. So but if you are interested in just seeing one more, then you can watch that. And then just after that, I'm going to go into Photoshop and I'm going to show how I composite my ambient occlusion bake and my just general diffuse bake of the car together, add vignette and stuff like that, and then how that's my finished image, and I'll move on. So if you want to watch that, then I'll just go and do another quite boring material right now, and then we'll move on to the final Photoshop. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is just create a nice basic green metal material for the framework. So what I could do is just turn off the brown from this and then just use that material and it would match. But what I want to do is just generate a whole new material really quickly that might have some of its own kind of like problems as I generate it, so that you can see how I'm working. So what I'm going to do again is first I'm going to change this to frame, so I don't forget later. And then I'm going to create a new smart material. I'm going to go to metals. So there's obviously loads of metals. Probably just going to be painted because obviously we don't want camo and stuff like that. And there's loads of choice. I don't want this kind of like 3D pattern, or you kind of have to use your imagination as you work. Like imagine the colors are different and you've changed masks and all sorts. So I think this painted machine looks like it gives me a really nice result. So I'll take that one. And I think the first thing I need to do is actually copy the green across from the other material. So I'll go back to my tank armor and I'm just going to go into this green, copy this code and go into my painted machine, and I'm just going to change it over. So the first thing you'll notice is that my texel density is so high that the damage is actually tiling like crazy and it's really small. So I'm going to change the mask for how much paint is sitting over the top. So this is quite easy because I just want to change the scale of the mask. So I obviously want like a much larger scale, so something more like that. And then because it combines with the second mask, I could see if this makes much difference to it. It doesn't look like it does really, but this is just basically just like metal coming through. Maybe I want to try and turn the contrast down a little bit, so just get a little bit more of a mid-ground between things. So it looks like what I'm doing is I'm looking at this right-hand viewport more than the center, because you can kind of see that the contrast on them is slightly different. I notice that the one on the right tends to give me more accurate results. So I'm just going to accept that. So as you can see, there's more metal coming through. It feels like a better scale. And then what I want to do is my dirt has a black AO right now, and I do want dirt because obviously I don't want it to be nice and clean. So I'm just going to go and adjust the mask for that. So because we've not brought in bakes and meshes and stuff like that, it has a very basic kind of mask going on right now. So what we could do is just change the scale like we did on the last one, but it's not, I don't know, there it is, but there's not a lot going on. So what I'm going to do is if I click on this load texture, I'm actually going to load this concrete texture because that'll give me loads of information. And I'm gonna pull down the contrast on it and bring the brightness way up, and then I'll scale it up. I just zoomed, oh that's in here. And yeah, I'll scale it as well. So how do I scale? Where is it? Scale. So if I scale that up one, that'll give me some large scale information. I have loads, like not a lot of contrast, and then I'll turn the brightness down a little bit more. Yeah, so I mean it's a little bit crazy, but it just means that you'll get to see a lot of information. So now what I have is what looks like kind of weird metal coming through or something. So I'm going to make it quite light because I'm kind of imagining like it's damaged primer. So I'm going to kind of go like this kind of color. And then I'm going to, oh yeah, no, that's a bit too contrasty. Something a bit more like this, I think. But the specular was quite high on that, so I might be wrong at the moment. So I'm going to take the specular, I'm going to bring it down a little bit more. And then the steel base, I'll leave that where it is, and I'm going to bring this up very slightly because it was a little bit higher on the camo. And then I am going to go back into, I'm kind of ignoring the gloss values because they're kind of happening in Modo already. So then the dirt kind of looks okay, and then the bump, I'm actually going to make it so that the dirt is sitting slightly above. No, I want to go slightly below because I kind of want it to look a bit like primer. And then the scuffs, I'll make that quite dark so it feels like kind of deep scratches. Okay, and that is pretty much it. I mean, they're still very contrasty, so I'll just kind of go, I don't want it to be too crazy. Yeah, we'll see how that looks. I think the gloss values are kind of like making stuff look a bit crazy at the moment. So yeah, I think it'll look good when it's in Modo. If we get them quite close, then you'll get a more accurate representation of what it will look like. Okay, so what I'm going to do is save the project. This probably won't look great right away, so then we can iterate on that and export the material. And then we'll just go across to Modo. And so, right, okay. So I have my material, which is if I click on materials, it chooses them in the shader editor. So if I click on this one, I have my frame material, I've created a group, so I'm just going to add a layer, image map, load image, and I'm going to go to my texture work and grab these three, or just this one for now, I guess. So that'll be my diffuse color. No, that's reflect, so I'm going to just set that as specular amount. We can have a look at how that looks. We don't want anything too crazy because it's just going to end up being green bars anyway, so I'm not too worried about getting it super accurate. I mean, yeah, it looks cool. It looks like a similar kind of spec value, and you can see a little bit of change here and there. So then I'm going to bring in our bump. We'll work in the same order as before, so we'll do frame bump. Oh yeah, that's diffuse color, so we should do surface shading bump. That will just give us a little bit of bump information here and there. So you can see a little bit around certain areas. And then I'm going to bring in the diffuse. and we'll leave that as diffuse color because that feels fine. Yep, and that's pretty much it. So if we zoom out and look at the car, it should just kind of disappear into the design because it's just green posts with not a lot going on. And that's what 95% of materials on the car are. They're just nice DD materials, just quickly chucked together very quickly, and then occasionally a nice slightly more complex one like this camo. And then that's it basically. So now I will go into Photoshop and show how I can composite the final image. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is just show quickly how I'm putting my final images together. So the first thing I do is I take my render at the end and I stick that in Photoshop, and I take my AO, stick that in Photoshop, and all I'm going to do is I'll turn my AO off for now. So the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this, and I'm going to do a sharpen by about 40%, just to sharpen it up slightly. You could probably get the same result out of just like turning up your render settings, but it's going to add more time, which I don't want. So you can see it's only a very small difference, but it just brings a little bit of detail out. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this again. I'm going to use the move tool and I'm going to offset it slightly, and I'm going to turn off the green and blue channel to create a little bit of chromatic aberration. Some people don't like this, so if you don't like it, don't do it, but I quite like adding a little bit of this. So you can see there's a small amount on the tires, and so it's really, really subtle. And then I'm going to mask it all out, basically. So I'm going to mask it all out so it's gone, and then I'm going to bring a tiny, tiny amount of it back in, because, yeah, no one likes loads of chromatic aberration. So I'm going to bring in a little bit around the tires, a little bit over this top bit here, and a bit across the top of the engine. And that's it, because I don't want any on the actual detail you're looking at, just only on the slight little bit on the silhouette. It just makes it look like there's a slight imperfection from the actual camera lens. So the next thing I do is with the AO is I'll multiply that and I'll stick it at around 65%. It might be too high, but we'll find out in a second. And then I'll duplicate that and I'll overlay at about 15%. So as you can see, it just makes some of the shapes pop out very slightly, and obviously stops it from feeling too dark. The AO just does AO-y stuff, so maybe I'll turn that down a little bit. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll create a solid color, fill up the entire thing, and then delete my image. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set my feather to 100%, or maybe 100 will be fine. Sometimes use 150, and I'll have an elliptical marquee, and I will just select from just outside of the image to just over the other side over here, select my mask, and then fill that marquee with black. So I have a very subtle vignette. I'll turn that down to 60%-ish, just because it brings a little bit, it brings your eyes towards the center of the image slightly. And then the last thing is that you get this banding in the vignette. So I just want to go into while I have the mask selected, I just want to go to filter, noise, add noise, and that'll just bring just enough noise in that it will stop the banding, or most of it, and then yeah. And that's my final image. So yeah, that's it. I hope this is helpful. And thank you Quixel guys for asking me to do a tutorial, and thank you for watching. Cheers. Bye.